Where do we even find the prompts? If I haven't gotten my secondary essays yet, how do I even know
Yes.
what to write about? What am I pre-writing?
The amount of space you have can differ, and some use word counts, other schools use character counts.
Probably going to be sort of a daily part-time job. I mean, is the one way of thinking of it. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Chats with Dylan Nav. I'm Dr. Dylan Cahill. This is my partner, Dr. Naveed Ghaffari, and we're both recent graduates of Harvard Medical School. Together, we've advised hundreds of applicants on all parts of the med school application process. And today, we're going into a part 2 on secondary essays. We emphasize the importance of pre-writing your secondary essays and kind of gave an overview of the process about what to expect as they roll in last time. But now we want to dive a little bit deeper into what that pre-writing process looks like and some of the types of questions you might want to look out for. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Ghaffari here. So when we say pre-write, what are we talking about and how do we go about that?
Yes, it means you wrote the personal statement. Each question is not going to be as much effort and time that you probably gave the personal statement, but it's still a piece of writing that you want to be really well thought out, well read, and a nice representation of yourself. And this time you have a lot more prompts than just the one personal statement. So for the pre-writing aspect, it's important to just get words on the page. You might, in your personal statement, have started off trying one version of a story of certain experiences and then changed it over time. You want to leave room for that to also happen in your secondary questions, especially the ones that are going to come up multiple times, because what you ideally want to avoid is a situation where you're asked a very common question, for example, talking about overcoming some adversity, and you write something that's sort of half-baked and submit it to a few schools, and then you get the question later again at another school, and you come back with a fresh pair of eyes, and you're like, oh wait, I actually want to do it this way. You totally change it. It's for the better, so it's good for that school, but then you're like, oh shoot, it would have been nice to have had this essay submitting it for the previous school or several schools. So that's why the importance of pre-writing is just giving yourself a longer runway of time, because right now there aren't any secondaries waiting on you. You've got this time. So I would say just make a Word document for all the questions. You can go online.
That was one of my questions for you is where do we even find the prompts? If I haven't gotten my secondary essays yet, how do I even know what to write about? What am I pre-writing? How do I go about it?
What are you pre-writing? If you just Google med school secondaries, one of the first links that's going to come up is this helpful website that has most of the schools. You click on the school name and it shows what their secondary questions were for the previous year and even previous years. And for the most part, the questions don't change year to year. There may be some changes, but for the most part, they're gonna be similar. And then you can start to see the similar questions at the schools you apply. So then I would take each question, make it its own Word doc, and then just start jotting ideas down. Just free form, whatever comes to mind, bullets, put different, like for the question of what sort of diversity do you think you're gonna bring, whether ethnically, another piece of your background, experiences, that could go in a lot of different directions. And so put as many ideas as you can on the page so you feel like you're getting the ball rolling, getting the creative juices flowing. And I would tackle it in parallel because you're going to have a ton of questions. So that's at least a starting point. Let me turn it over to Dr. Cahill.
Yeah, I will say, when you look over years of data on these are the types of questions that are asked from the same school, the more it's the same year over year, the more confidence you can have that they're going to ask the same questions this year. But every now and then you will get burned. This is like the 1 year out of 4 or 5 in a row that they added a new prompt or removed one of the others. I still remember that happening. I definitely got burned by the University of Michigan, to call them out. And so
that's right. They changed it.
I was so ready. It was one of the first ones. And then I had to write a whole essay from scratch the day that their secondary came back to me. So that will happen. But what I actually tell people if that were to come up is, first off, there's a decent chance that whatever you wrote and packaged, to be ready for can be applied to a different essay for another school. And even if not, it's a way of getting your thoughts down on a certain topic that might even come up in interviews. So you could speak more fluidly, having consolidated your thoughts. So there's never really completely wasted time. But if you want to be safe, go to the schools that tend to be consistent year over year. Prioritize the schools that either have a history, if you look at some historical data, of sending their secondaries out early, or even probably more important than that, is just the schools that matter to you, where you're going to want to have a quick turnaround. But I also want to set some expectations here. As much as you can pre-write, not only will things change, but things will be different from from school to school. So if you think, oh, I'm going to write, one essay on this, one essay on this, one essay on this, and that'll cover my bases, and then it'll just be a little tweaking, there's actually kind of a lot of tweaking. And this will, depending on when you apply, it'll mostly take you through the summer months. I mean, we're probably talking a solid 4 to 8 weeks at least, depending on how many schools you apply to and kind of the cadence. And you might find that that perfect paragraph about that meaningful extracurricular of yours that you fit on that first school, now you need to make it like 2,000 characters for the next school, and then the next school wants a 750 character version of it, and then another one wants that same thing, but they want to ask like how that affected your professional development. So you're really going to have to, no matter how much pre-writing you do, there's always going to be a next stage. So you really have to stay self-motivated. Remember the goal of being a physician one day, what got you started in the process, so you don't kind of lose sight of it and just get drowned in all these and burnt out. Probably going to be sort of a daily part-time job, I mean, is the one way of thinking of it. I had a gap year job working at a hospital, and basically I would come home every day, and probably for about 2 hours, maybe at least an hour of solid writing time, I would be working on the next set of essays. And that was just the flow of that summer, and that's what it took to get it done, to do it well.
Yes, I think setting those expectations is super important. And also, as part of that, just to emphasize what Dylan had said, schools may ask the same question, but the amount of space you have can differ. And some use word counts, other schools use character counts. So I remember for some essays, it was more or less the same one, but there was like 3 different versions that were just different lengths. And it's not a matter of just cutting out a few sentences, because a few sentences can really change the meaning. And so it took even more time to be like, okay, I still want to have the right message, but I'm condensing it. And so it requires a certain greater thought process than just like, oh, I need to cut out a few sentences here and there. And just to emphasize again, when you do get your secondaries, try to turn them around as soon as you can while still maintaining the highest quality. If you can send the essay out to a friend here or there just to get another pair of eyes on it, that's really helpful. For the essay, it also can be a nice boost for yourself to be like, okay, it's nice that somebody else looked over this, but it's gonna be a long process. The number of essays you're gonna write is really gonna be, depending on how many schools, anywhere from probably 20 to 50. So I like what Dylan said. Remind yourself of why you're doing this, so that when you are tired and it's the end of the day and you're writing and you're like, when is this gonna end? This is really like the last step to get to hopefully that interview stage, to then hopefully shine and get that offer that you've been hoping for.
And one of the last things we can touch on is some of the key types of questions that you might be asked about, and some general ideas of how to approach them. The first thing I want to say is a lot of schools will actually have an optional essay, the kind of essay that says something like, if there's something meaningful to your background that you haven't had the chance to share elsewhere in your application, feel free to do so here. The question I get a lot is, are those truly optional? The short answer is yes, those are optional, especially depending on how it's framed. But often, if it's very open-ended, and if the school has only asked 2 or 3 other secondary topics that are somewhat narrowly focused, often there is an opportunity there for you to share something of value, whether that's your regional ties, your connection to the school, why that school matters to you, as long as there's really something there, some connection, rather than just praising the school. Or it could be something about your background or identity that you haven't had the chance to share that, again, is meaningful to you and part of why you want to be a physician, perhaps even relates to a program at that school that you can even tie in. That can be a value add. But on this topic, there's actually a well-known secondary essay topic for Harvard. And while I don't remember the exact prompt off the top of my head, it does ask a question about if there is some important part of your background or identity, speaking to some challenges or something you had to overcome, this is your space to do so. And I thought long and hard about it. There were some things I could have fit in, but I actually, for one, left that blank. And, ultimately did get interviewed and accepted. So I say that just so that for someone out there really deciding if you really don't think it fits, if you feel like you'd be forcing an answer that'd be a little bit inauthentic, remember, you don't have to force it. So I'll turn over if you have anything to add to that or other questions to be looking out for.
There's just going to be so many questions. So I think it's really important to think about your application now in whole with the secondary. Think about what you put for your personal statement. Go look at your activity section. You're going to be writing about these activities in some shape in these secondaries. So you want it to still, of course, be on brand with what you wrote in your primary, but you don't want to copy and paste or sort of regurgitate that. So it's really about finding that right balance of how can you share something a little new, a different impression you had, another accomplishment accomplishment that you weren't able to write about for the same activity, but now you can really emphasize it more. So it's really about just thinking how you can show these other sides of you in a really genuine, true, and authentic way.
I like that point you brought up. A question I've been asked before is, I already wrote that in my primary. Can I write that in my secondary? On one hand, the answer is absolutely yes. It would be crazy if your primary, which is supposed to be, reflecting who you are, you as an applicant, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of new material to bring into the secondaries, like that won't fit. Now, the question is, should I write the exact same thing? Absolutely not. If maybe it was working as a clinical assistant in a pediatrics clinic, well, maybe you wrote about one story for a most meaningful essay in your primary, but now there's other stories that were equally meaningful to you that would fit for, it depends on exactly how the prompt is worded. Think of it that way, of different stories, different facets of your background. And be thinking about this at a slightly higher level is, what does it say about you, right? Don't just say like what you did, kind of echoing what we in our video on the primary application, but try to communicate something, a value that schools are looking for, and not explicitly saying, this taught me how to communicate in a clinical setting, but talk about a story, where you had to communicate on a fast-paced team to like solve a problem and that improved patient care or something. Be thinking about what are the actual messages of the stories you're telling, and that will make for a higher quality secondary essay overall.
And the last thing that I'll say is, when you now look at this application, this is, once you submit your secondary, you've got your primary, you've got your secondary. This is everything that the admissions committee is looking at before they decide to give you an interview. So ask yourself, look at these materials and say, is there anything about me that's not in here? Because if there is, get it in there. This is your time to really show who you are, show what you've done, show your passions. So just make sure that if there's this one extracurricular or aspect about some leadership that you did that you're really proud of and that's important to you, make sure it's in your application. Don't feel like, oh, I'm saving that for the interview. There's other things that will come up in the interview, but just try to put your best foot forward, because this is really what's going to decide whether you're going to get an interview or not.
And my last bonus tip is for the question on why this school, how to answer that. Regional ties are actually often like a quite important and compelling way to answer that question. So sometimes people think, I have some family in the area, but I don't know if that's like a weak reason. I think that's actually a great reason. Remember, the schools are trying to protect their yield being, of all the acceptances they give out, how many of those students actually accept and enroll in the school. And if they want to maximize that, they want to know that like, if you get in, you're actually going to come. And the reasons you're actually going to come is because it's your home state, it's where you grew up in, it's where you have family living now. Maybe it's nearby of the school where you went to school. If you're applying to the medical school affiliated with your same college that you went to, you can even mention that this has become my home away from home. I can't wait to spend the next 4 years as a med school. Things like that actually do carry weight. And I even had an applicant who was waitlisted at a school, and during the process of applying, getting waitlisted, he said his fiance became a resident in one of the hospitals, and should he mention that? And I said, absolutely mention that, because this school knows damn well that if you get accepted off the waitlist, you're gonna come here. And sure enough, that happened, and I was very excited for him when it did. Same thing with secondary essays. Give them all the reasons that matter. Don't only frame it in terms of having family and so in the region, but there's a whole lot of reasons that you could fit into even just, again, a paragraph of why you want to attend a school, and all of that's going to matter. So I think we've hit on a lot of the high points. In the end, it's all about quality, being intentional, staying organized, and remembering why you're doing it all. Hope this was another helpful tip on the secondary essay process. And I know Dr. Gafida, and I know Dr. Ghaffari.
Come on, Dylan. Come on. What's going on?
And I know Dr. Ghaffari and I are wishing you guys the best of luck.
Yes, good luck.